So here's what happened in Britain. And honestly, you couldn't write this as fiction because nobody would believe it. A government minister goes on live television, gets asked simple yes or no questions about a case that has the entire country talking, and proceeds to spend 15 minutes saying absolutely nothing. Not evasive answers, not spin, just pure, unadulterated nothing. And the story behind those questions? Even worse. We're talking about a convicted offender who committed acts against a 14-year-old girl, got released from prison by mistake, and then, get this, negotiated a payment from the British government to leave the country. Your tax pounds handed over to someone who should have been behind bars. This is the state of British immigration policy right now, and somebody needs to explain how we got here. I spent years inside a major media organization, watched editors kill stories that didn't fit the approved narrative, saw how inconvenient truths got buried under layers of spin. I walked away from that world because I couldn't stomach it anymore. Now I work for myself, answer to nobody, and I tell you what's actually happening, not what they want you to believe. And if you value that kind of straight talk, do me a favor, hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and if you really want to support independent journalism that doesn't bow to corporate interests or political pressure, consider becoming a channel sponsor. It means more than you know, it keeps this operation running, and it tells me there are still people out there who care about the truth. All right. Let me walk you through this disaster from the beginning, because every single detail makes it worse. Hadush Kebatu, 38 years old, arrives in Britain in June of this year. He doesn't fly in, doesn't go through any official channels. He comes across the English Channel in a small boat. That's the method of choice now. Cross from France in an overloaded dinghy, land on British soil, claim asylum, and the government is legally obligated to process your case. Kebatu gets placed in the Bell Hotel in Epping, which has been converted into accommodation for asylum seekers, and within weeks he commits violent acts against two people, a 14-year-old girl and an adult woman. Let that sink in for a second. This man arrives illegally, gets housed at taxpayer expense, and immediately targets vulnerable people. In September, he goes to trial and gets sentenced to 12 months in prison. Not a long sentence, but at least he's off the streets, right? Well, here's where British competence really shines. On October 25th, the prison system mistakenly releases him. Just, oops, wrong prisoner, out you go. And according to the Prison Officers Association, Kebatu wasn't even the only one. He was one of 5 inmates erroneously released that same week. 5. How does that happen once, let alone 5 times in 7 days? So now you've got a convicted offender, someone who targeted a child, wandering around freely for more than 24 hours. He's finally arrested in London on Sunday morning, October 27th, and you'd think, okay, problem solved, back to prison, serve your time, then deportation. But no, this is where the story goes from incompetent to absolutely insane. The government decides to deport Kebatu back to Ethiopia, which is the correct decision, except Kebatu has other ideas. He demands £1,500 under Britain's voluntary return scheme, and when they say no, he threatens to disrupt the flight and file legal challenges. Standard procedure for someone who understands exactly how broken the system is. The government could have said, tough, you're going back whether you like it or not, you're a convicted criminal, you have no leverage here, but instead they negotiate. They actually sit down and work out a deal with this man. And the final agreement, £500 cash from British taxpayers handed over to someone who committed terrible acts on British soil as payment to convince him to leave. The Home Office calls this an operational decision, says the alternative would have been slower, more expensive, involved detention, a new flight, and inevitable legal battles. So essentially, the British government is now publicly admitting that they negotiate with convicted offenders about how much money it takes to make them go away. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, because we're just getting started, and this story has layers that'll make your head spin. Drop a comment too. Let me know what you think about governments paying people to leave. I want to hear your take on this madness. Now, the money is outrageous enough, but what happened next is almost worse. Wednesday morning, Alex Norris, who holds the impressive title of Minister for Border Security and Asylum, appears on Good Morning Britain for an interview. The host, Ed Balls, asks him straightforward questions about the Kebatu case, and Norris proceeds to demonstrate a masterclass in political evasion that should be studied in communication schools as an example of what not to do. Balls asks, and I'm paraphrasing but keeping the essence, can you tell us whether any money was paid to Kebatu for his return to Ethiopia? Simple question, yes or no, maybe specify the amount. Norris responds, and I wish I was exaggerating, I cannot tell you that. He knows Kebatu requested money early in the process and was initially refused, but beyond that, Norris claims he doesn't have the information. Balls, clearly stunned, asks again, "You're the immigration minister. This is a high-profile case that's all over the news, and you don't know if money was paid." Norris digs in deeper. Ministers don't get involved in operational movements that happen at night. Operational movements. That's the phrase he uses to describe paying off a convicted offender, as if this was some routine logistical detail like which airline to book or what time the flight departs, instead of a policy decision to hand taxpayer money to someone who harmed British citizens. The entire interview continues like this. 15 minutes of Norris dodging, deflecting, and ultimately saying nothing concrete while somehow using a lot of words to do it. Let's zoom out for a second, because the Kibatu case isn't happening in a vacuum. It's a symptom of a much larger disaster. Since Labour took power in 2024, over 41,000 migrants have crossed the channel in small boats. The government promised to crack down on smuggling gangs, promised to process claims faster, promised to get control of the borders. Instead, the backlog of asylum cases has hit a record 224,000. You read that right. Nearly 250,000 people waiting for decisions. And the staff handling these applications, they've actually decreased. Labour inherited 2,500 caseworkers and somehow reduced that number to just over 2,000. So fewer people trying to handle more cases, which means longer waits, higher costs, and more chaos. And speaking of costs, let's talk about hotels. The government has been housing asylum seekers in hotels because they don't have enough proper accommodation, and according to Oxford Migration Observatory data, the average cost per person per night in a hotel is £170. Compare that to £27 per night for other types of housing. That's more than 6 times more expensive. Between 2020 and 2025, the cost of hotel accommodation per night jumped from £64 to £170. The total spent on hotels is in the billions, literal billions of pounds, and a parliamentary committee just called this policy catastrophic, chaotic, and expensive. Those are their words, not mine, and they directly blamed the Home Office for wasting staggering amounts of money through sheer incompetence. Are you seeing the pattern here? Because it gets even better. The government announces a plan to move asylum seekers out of expensive hotels and into military barracks instead, which sounds reasonable until you dig into the details. During the same interview where Norris couldn't answer basic questions about Kibatu, he claimed that the hourly cost of military sites is roughly the same as hotels, then immediately admitted it might actually be more expensive. So you're moving people from hotels that cost too much into military facilities that cost the same, or possibly more. The Defence Minister, Luke Pollard, was at least honest about it. He admitted the military sites could cost more, but justified it because of public sentiment. Not because it saves money, not because it's more efficient, but because it looks better politically. How many people are they planning to move into these military facilities? 900. That's the grand total. 900 individuals spread across 2 sites, Cameron Barracks in Inverness and Crowborough Training Camp in East Sussex. Meanwhile, as of June 2025, there are over 32,000 asylum seekers still in hotels. So this big policy announcement, this solution to the hotel crisis, addresses less than 3% of the problem and might cost more money. You can't make this up. Here's another gem from the Norris interview. Prime Minister Keir Starmer promised to close the migrant hotels within a year, a clear, specific timeline. But when Bowles brought this up, Norris immediately walked it back, said the commitment is actually by the end of this Parliament, which could be 5 years away. Bowles pointed out the contradiction, and Norris, clearly flustered, said the Prime Minister will speak for himself about when his government will deliver our commitments. Bowles, bless him, calmly replied, "I think he speaks for the government minister, not only for himself." Just brutal. You're watching a government minister unable to keep his own prime minister's promises straight on live television. Before we go further, let me remind you, this kind of reporting doesn't happen on mainstream channels anymore. They're too busy protecting their access, too worried about upsetting the wrong people. That's why I need your support. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you can, become a channel sponsor. Independent voices only survive when people like you decide they matter. The Home Secretary herself, Yvette Cooper, admitted the day before Norris's interview that the Home Office has not met the challenge of crises and is not yet ready to perform its functions. Let me repeat that. The person in charge of the entire department openly confessed that her own ministry isn't capable of doing its job. When was the last time you heard a government official admit failure that directly? Usually they spin it, blame the previous administration, claim they're making progress against unprecedented challenges. Cooper just straight up said, yeah, we're not ready, we're failing. It's almost refreshing in its honesty, except for the minor detail that this is the ministry responsible for national security and border control. Public reaction to the Norris interview was swift and brutal. Social media lit up with comments ranging from praise for Ed Balls' questioning to absolute fury at government incompetence. One viewer wrote that Balls nailed it, that he's usually criticized for being too soft on Labour ministers, but this time he hit every point. Others were less diplomatic. One comment called it Labour lies and spin. Absolutely horrifying. Said the first thing Norris should do is apologize to the nation and to the victims. And you know what? They're not wrong. This isn't about party politics. This is about basic competence and accountability. When you release prisoners by mistake, when you pay them to leave, when your own ministers can't answer straightforward questions about those payments, something is fundamentally broken. Let's be very clear about what this represents. Hadush Kebatu arrived illegally, committed serious offences that harmed real people, including a child, got sentenced, got released by accident, and then extracted money from the government as a condition of leaving. And the government's response when asked about it, we don't comment on operational details. That phrase, operational details, is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. It's covering up a policy decision to negotiate with someone who had no right to negotiate, who should have been put on a plane regardless of his demands. The message this sends is staggering. If you're in Britain illegally and you get caught, just threaten legal action and they'll pay you to go away. What kind of deterrent is that? What kind of message does that send to the thousands of people considering that channel crossing? And the mistakes keep compounding. Remember, Kebatu wasn't supposed to be free in the first place. He was mistakenly released, along with 4 other prisoners that same week. The prison system, which is supposed to be a controlled environment with records and procedures, somehow let 5 people walk out who weren't supposed to leave. Each of those releases represents a failure of protocol, a breakdown in the system. Kebatu spent 24 hours freely moving around before being recaptured in London. During that time, he could have fled, could have hurt someone else, could have disappeared into the country entirely. But sure, let's call that an operational detail. The hotel situation deserves more attention because the numbers are genuinely shocking. £170 per night per person. Think about what that means annually. If someone stays in that hotel for a full year, that's over £62,000 just for accommodation. Not food, not medical care, not legal services, just the room. Multiply that by 32,000 people currently in hotels, and you're spending nearly £2 billion a year. And the government's solution is to maybe move 900 of them to military barracks that might cost the same amount. The Oxford Migration Observatory, which is about as credible a source as you can get on these issues, shows that costs have more than doubled in 5 years, and the trajectory is only going up. Here's what really frustrates me about this whole situation. There are legitimate asylum seekers in this system, people fleeing genuine danger who deserve protection. They're stuck in the same broken system as people gaming it, and their cases take forever to process because there aren't enough staff and there's no functioning system to separate legitimate claims from fraudulent ones. So the people who actually need help suffer, the taxpayers foot an enormous bill, and criminals like Kebatu exploit every gap in the process. Nobody wins except the people who know how to manipulate the system. The interview with Norris revealed something else too, the complete disconnect between political promises and reality. Starmer says 1 year to close the hotels. Norris says by the end of Parliament. Who's right? What's the actual plan? If the immigration minister doesn't know or won't say or can't keep the story straight, how are we supposed to have any confidence in delivery? And this is after Labour spent years in opposition criticizing the Conservatives for their handling of immigration. They had time to develop policies, to plan, to prepare. They've been in power long enough now that blaming the previous government is wearing thin. This is their mess now, and the Kebatu case is the perfect symbol of how badly they're handling it. Let me paint you the full picture of dysfunction here. A man enters the country illegally, commits violent acts, gets sentenced, gets released by mistake, demands money to leave, gets paid, and then when ministers are asked about it on national television, they claim they don't have the information. Meanwhile, the same government is spending billions on hotel accommodation that costs 6 times more than alternatives, planning to move a tiny fraction of people to military sites that might cost even more, reducing staff while the backlog grows, and openly admitting their ministry isn't ready to perform its basic functions. At what point does this stop being a series of mistakes and start being a systemic collapse? I want to pull back and talk about what this means beyond just one case or one interview. This is about whether a government can perform basic functions. Can they control borders? Can they house people seeking asylum without spending enormous amounts on hotels? Can they process applications in a reasonable time frame? Can they prevent prisoners from being released by error? Can they deport people without paying them off? These aren't complicated policy questions requiring years of debate. These are fundamental operational capabilities that any functioning government should possess. And right now, Britain's government is failing on every single one. The scary part is that this isn't new. The problems with asylum hotels, the channel crossings, the backlog, these have been building for years under different governments, which suggests the issue isn't just which party is in power, but something deeper about how the system works or doesn't work. There's no political will to make the hard choices, no courage to implement unpopular but necessary reforms, no accountability when things go wrong. Instead, you get ministers like Norris who can sit through 15 minutes of direct questioning and say nothing, and apparently face no consequences for it. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Should ministers who can't answer basic questions about their departments be fired? Should there be financial penalties for these kinds of failures? What would you do differently? I read every comment and I want to hear from you. Hadush Kabatu landed in Ethiopia Wednesday morning with £500 of British taxpayer money in his pocket. The ministers responsible for this mess are still collecting their salaries. The 32,000 people in expensive hotels are still there. The 224,000 case backlog is still growing, and British citizens are still paying for all of it, while being told that operational details prevent transparency. This is the new normal, apparently, where government failure is just accepted as the price of doing business. But here's what really bothers me, and this is why I keep doing this work. This is why I left the corporate media world to speak freely. The story we just went through should have been front-page news, should have led every broadcast, should have prompted immediate investigations and resignations. Instead, it's being treated as just another political story, another minister having a bad interview, another controversy that'll be forgotten by next week. The normalization of incompetence is maybe the most dangerous thing happening in politics right now. We've lowered the bar so far that a minister admitting he doesn't know basic facts about a major case in his department that's just Wednesday. Ed Balls deserves credit for pressing the questions, for not letting Norris slide with vague non-answers, for pointing out the contradictions and the absurdities. That's what journalism is supposed to be, holding power accountable, asking the questions the public wants answered. But one good interview doesn't fix a broken system, it just exposes it. And exposure without consequences is just entertainment. We watch, we get angry, we move on, and nothing changes. The same ministers make the same mistakes, the same problems persist, the same taxpayer money gets wasted. The voluntary return scheme, which is how Kabatu got his £500, is actually a legitimate program designed to help people who want to return home but can't afford it. The idea is that it's cheaper to pay for voluntary returns than forced deportations, which involve detention, security, legal fights. On paper, it makes sense. But it was never designed for convicted criminals who are being deported anyway. Kabatu didn't want to return, he was being forced to return, and he leveraged the threat of making that process difficult to extract payment. That's not how the scheme is supposed to work, and the fact that the government went along with it shows how desperate they are to avoid anything complicated. Think about the incentive structure this creates. If you're in Britain illegally, if you commit offences, if you're facing deportation, you now know that threatening legal action and being difficult might get you paid. Why would anyone cooperate with deportation when being uncooperative might net you a cash payment? The government has created a system that rewards the exact behaviour they're trying to discourage, and then they wonder why the problem keeps getting worse. It's not rocket science. If you pay people to be difficult, more people will be difficult. The Parliamentary committee that called the hotel policy catastrophic used strong language in their report. They didn't say challenging or suboptimal, they said catastrophic. They accused the Home Office of wasting billions, not millions, billions, through incompetence. This isn't partisan criticism, this is a parliamentary committee doing oversight, issuing findings based on evidence. And the government's response? Defensive justifications, promises to do better, explanations about inherited problems. No accountability, no consequences, no heads rolling, just more of the same. So let me bring this all together and remind you what we've covered, because there are a lot of threads here and they all connect. Hadush Kabatu, illegal entry, serious offences including against a child, imprisoned, mistakenly released with 4 others, free for 24 hours, recaptured, demanded money to leave, got £500, deported. Alex Norris, Immigration Minister, couldn't answer whether money was paid, called it operational details, contradicted the Prime Minister's timeline, defended expensive military sites as public sentiment, spent 15 minutes saying nothing. The broader system, 41,000 channel crossings since Labour took power, 224,000 case backlog, staff reduced instead of increased, 32,000 in hotels at £170 per night, billions spent, Parliamentary committee calling it catastrophic, Home Secretary admitting the department isn't ready to function. This is the state of British immigration policy in 2025. This is what governance looks like when nobody's really in charge, when systems break down, when accountability vanishes, when the normal expectation that ministers know basic facts about their departments no longer applies. And the truly frightening thing? This is being normalized. We're getting used to it. The outrage lasts a day, maybe two, and then it's on to the next scandal, the next failure, the next example of incompetence that would have toppled governments a generation ago. If you made it this far, you care about this stuff, and that matters. We need people who pay attention, who demand better, who refuse to accept that this is just how things are now. So do me a favor, like this video so more people see it. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next breakdown of government dysfunction. And if you really want to support this work, become a channel sponsor. This operation runs on support from viewers who believe independent journalism still matters, who think somebody should be telling these stories without corporate filters or political pressure. Every sponsor makes a difference, makes it possible for me to keep doing this without having to bow to advertisers or networks or anyone else. You make this possible. The Kabatu case is closed. He's back in Ethiopia. The story will fade from the headlines. But the problems remain. The broken system remains. The incompetent ministers remain. The billions being wasted remain. And unless people demand change, unless there are consequences for failure, nothing will improve. The next Kabatu is probably already here. And the government that couldn't handle this one isn't going to handle the next one any better. That's the real story. Not one case, not one interview, but a system in collapse and a government unwilling or unable to fix it. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next one.